This is the show in which I break down epic cinematic content. And in this video, I'm gonna try break down these three. Explain to the best of my ability how I think they were made. Now, apologies for the little huskiness in my voice. I don't smoke. I am just recovering from a bad cold. In case you're new here, I'm Ryan, editor, agency owner, and content creator, which means I deal with content every single day. And in order to stay inspired, I started this show to help people like yourself understand what great content looks like. And also to keep me trying new things, basically. With that being said, before we dive into today, I'm in need of a little energy boost. I am legally obligated to inform you guys that I am, since recently, an investor in these people. Try their shit. It's a game changer for people like you and I who sit until 4 o'clock in the morning with their pupils burning, trying to make that client edit finished, only for them to ask if they could change the music. So yeah, anyway, try it, see for yourself. Now, with that being said, let's dive into the first video of today. Here we go. Before all of you After Effects fanboys come at me, this was probably largely created in After Effects. The purpose of this show, however, is to help especially beginning creators understand how to edit. And I think After Effects, especially as a beginner, is very confusing, and therefore I try to explain how they can create the same in Premiere without needing to get into all of the scary details that After Effects has. With that out of the way, let's try and break down how I would make this in Premiere. So first of all, there's a slight glow around the word love. If you are in Premiere and you click the shadow button, there is a function whereby if you change the color of the shadow to match the color of the font, you put the blurriness of that all the way to the right, or at least as much as possible. It's going to create this slight halation around it. And that's how you create the little glow effect around the font. Now, in terms of how I would go about making the apple appear, you basically just have one of the letters, in this case the O, as a separate layer, and then you keyframe it, the scale of it to go to decrease. Also change the position so that it slightly pops up and then slightly goes down, almost like it has a slight shake. And then in the new frame, you make the apple pop in. Keyframing it like this allows your attention to be drawn towards something that's about to change, which in this case is the apple. So how would I go about doing this? You can just download two images. So first you'll need to find an image of an apple. Then what you can probably do is throw this into more or less any AI tool and say, take a big chunk out of my apple. A tool like Higgsfield I can recommend. Make sure to use the keywords, keep everything consistent. That will allow for AI not to change too much of the apple. Then you just line them up in post and obviously add great sound effects. That's what this guy's done throughout very well. It's just know where to place good sound effects. Let me show you. The thing about sound effects that I feel people don't do well enough is a lot of the time they will just add sound effects that they think look cool, but you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're seeing in order for it to work well? And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but often is underdone. So in this case, the reason why we use the pop sound effect is because the motion created by the O beforehand resembles a pop. So when the apple comes out, it feels like it's actually popping. Now this one where the chunk is taken out is kind of obvious because obviously there's a chunk bitten out. Same here, the toaster coming out with the like bing noise to signal that it's ready. I know this sounds obvious. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain it, but in essence, you have to ask yourself, what sound best symbolizes what's going on here? And does it fit the overall narrative that I'm trying to tell? Here's an example. It may be weird to add a cartoon sound effect, such as this pop, in your video if the rest of your video is super serious. And so being mindful of styling and not just taking a sound effect because it's the right sound effect is very important. Continuing. So how would I go about creating this? I would go into Canva. I would get an individual layer for each of these items, tomato, cheese, etc., etc. And I would manually keyframe each of them to kind of give this floating feeling through means of rotation and just turn it slightly. And then nest all of those as a layer and just keyframe them to fly out of screen as he does here. Then what he does well is continuing the motion of the fork coming in this way because it matches what your eye was seeing with the things flying off screen. I can assure you if he would have had the fork come from the top, it would have felt slightly off. Again here, same story. You could even be able to do this with a clever AI prompt, but otherwise you could easily download each of these suites as an individual layer and you kind of animate them to come from the top and just fall cleverly onto the ice cream. Also, a nice detail that shouldn't be understated is the little grit here on the back to make this feel slightly more dynamic than just another black background. So it's a lot more of the same tricks, matching the motion here. This is what makes a good editor versus a great editor. Basically, a lot of similar styles. Once you understand how to make one of these concepts, I think you could apply it to all of this, but the ability lies in being able to design them well. And a lot of the time I tend to use Canva for these kind of things, as they have very hyper-realistic looking layers, and I just download each layer as a green screen, drag them into Premiere Pro, remove the green screen, and then adjust them through means of keyframes to my liking. Again, learn After Effects, but there's a massive learning curve. And that's why I prefer to not recommend that for people new to editing. Moving on with video 2. This guy, I've seen him so often. I've actually broken down a few of his things before and he's just so super talented.
Photogenic people piss me off. Forget people. I can probably click a photo of this guy right now and he'll still look majestic. How is it fair that I have to clean up, prepare, smile a certain way at a specific angle, and yet my gallery always ends up empty? It's because of photogenic people that I prefer being behind the camera. Being the photographer meant I'm not in frame, but I still get to be an important part of the memory. This technique worked great till I ran out of friends. That day, I got myself a tripod and made my comeback in front of the lens. My improvisation got me my first ever viral shot and fueled every bit of my effort towards content. Today, I get to recreate that photo but with a new helper. So I put on the exact outfit, went to the same location, set up my new 200 megapixel helper, dipped my balls in cold water, and alright, I need specific camera settings to make this work. Thankfully, this phone offers full control just like my DSLR. So I bumped up the shutter speed, opened the aperture wide, and clicking one single frame was never the...
So good, man. My most confusing, mind-blowing bit is probably the beginning here.
Photogenic people piss me off.
How would I even go about creating something like this? Maybe it's clever use of AI. At least his book actually recorded, especially because he has this more often. So I'd imagine this Polaroid is real, probably green screen. I'd imagine these layers are real. And then obviously that's where it stops. That green screen allows him to kind of keyframe it out, change this to a color matte, and then we need the animation. At least the animation could be AI.
Piss me off. Forget.
Either way, you obviously need a clip of a person. Do this in an AI, you would need some sort of prompt, like a cartoon figure of me rotates in 3D and then gets shot and falls to the ground. Something like this. Dude, if you're watching this by any chance, let me know how you did this, man. I think this is crazy. This one I could recreate if I find a video of someone who shoots and then just decrease saturation. Or maybe he actually filmed that himself with like a toy gun, that could be. Then we get into the sick 3D text.
Click a photo of this guy right now and he'll still look majestic. How is it fair that majestic?
Also a small detail, but kind of effective to selling a certain feeling, if that's what you're looking for, is this little border around here. Now, you can create this relatively easy yourself. You could also look for something called a Super 8 film. Those are overlays which you can drag on top, and then you select the screen blending mode. And what that does is it just leaves the black segments and it allows everything else behind it to come through. In this case, it looks like it was just a border dragged on top with a bit of Gaussian blur on the edges. And then obviously the corners are curved. There's a few different ways you can create it, but it helps to sell this technique, especially the Super 8s are very handy if you want to sell like a vintage feeling to your edits.
Fair that I have to clean up, prepare, smile a certain way at a specific angle, and yet my gallery always ends up empty. It's because of photogenic people that I prefer being...
You might think that these shots right here are like crazy edits, but it's just smart filming. I say just. You have to have the creativity to come up with this. And so what I imagine my boy does for sure is he writes out a script beforehand and then thinks about how he can connect things visually to make this appealing to watch. And so when writing the scene, he might have thought, okay, I need a collection of smileys that I stick to the wall. I film down screen like this.
At a specific angle, and yet
about filming into the bucket and then revealing the word empty. There's no crazy edit in here, it's just literally being able to come up with a crazy shot idea.
It's because of photogenic people that...
So how has he done this segment? I'd imagine he's probably printed these out, cut them out very tightly, taken one picture, adjusted it lightly. So let's take the camera. The camera's in the first frame is like this, you take a picture. You adjust slightly, take a new picture. You adjust slightly, take a new picture. And so then in post, you line up all these pictures and it should kind of match out like this. Funny enough, this is how videos actually are made. Videos are just a long string of pictures taken behind each other. And that's also why things like 1/24 is like the amount of frames per second of filming, which just means in 1 second, we've taken 24 pictures. And so when you have a higher frame rate, like 1/60 or even up to 120 for true slow motion things, it just means within 1 second, we've taken 120 pictures, which means that when you try to slow things down, you are able to have the space in order to stretch it out to really show that slow motion. I feel like this is something people underestimate. When they film on their phone, a lot of the time they will put their camera settings to the highest possible because they believe that's higher quality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means that more pictures are being taken, but it also means that the look, from my opinion, people disagree, the higher the frame rate, the more unrealistic it looks. And so personally, I always film, in this case on the camera, at 25 frames per second, on phones 24. Don't ask me why there's a difference. And it just means that the motion blur is more natural looking.
People that I prefer being behind the camera. Being the photographer meant I'm not in frame.
How would I do this? You would create this image in a tool like Canva, put a green screen on it, drag it into Premiere, and then just keyframe it like this using the scale and the position keyframes slightly smaller as it goes down, make it have this motion. And then obviously smart use of text placement to add to the 3D effect. And then this part is of course again real.
In frame, but I still get to be an important part of the memory. This technique worked great till I ran out of friends. That day, I got myself a tripod and made my comeback in front of the lens. My improvisation got me my first ever viral shot and fueled every bit of my...
This little trick here is a following counter. If you search follower counter green screen, you can probably find a lot of these animations already made, motion graphics, and then you can just drag in here. I know that Canva has a few as well. I feel like this is becoming a selfless plug for Canva. I'm not sponsored. I have no affiliate link. I just love it as a tool. It's great.
Effort towards content. Today, I get to recreate that photo, but with a new helper.
Now this blew my mind. This is a collection of shots. First shot, him moving to the table, sitting down and holding up his hand. This is a new shot, this right here. For this shot, he probably has someone standing here, dropping the phone so that he can catch it. Then you need a 3D model of your phone. Could also film yourself by, for example, holding your phone on a thin string and filming it as it slightly rotates, and then either filming it behind a green paper so that you can remove the paper, or you could create a model online probably of a phone. You could probably even look on YouTube and find a couple of versions of this phone already. You have to kind of figure out how to do that. Now the butterfly, I'd imagine you could find a video of a butterfly flapping their wings, and then it's just about clever keyframing it to the phone so that it looks like he's carrying the phone. On the whole, crazy shot.
So I put on the exact outfit, went to the same location, set up my new 200 megapixel helper, dipped my balls in cold water, and alright, I need specific camera settings to make this work. Thankfully, this phone offers full control just like my DSLR. So I bumped up the shutter speed, opened the aperture wide, and clicking one single frame.
Crazy shot, especially crazy shot if actually shot on a phone. That's insane. How do you get these kind of details on a phone? That's crazy, man. That is that video come to an end. My guy, you are so fucking talented. I'm playing with the idea of getting some people on the show or interviewing some people, trying to get a more in-depth interview into how they've made certain videos. So if that's something you're interested in, do comment down below, let me know. We've come to the part of the show where it's time for hooks of the week. Here are 3 hooks that I loved and you should steal in your next video. Let's go. Hook 1. Having a macro shot and just inverting the colors of it repeatedly, matched with a great sound effect. Hook 2.
You need a box to create in. Let me explain.
Filming yourself in a box. Hook 3.
I wake up, knowing I'm me, knowing I'm him, knowing I'm P. I wake up, knowing I'm...
Having a mixture of the same shots in different frames and boxes on screen at once to confuse the shit out of people. And that was Hooks of the Week. Which means it's time for the last reel of today. And this one was different to anything I've seen so far, and I like it when that happens. So I'm gonna do my best to try and break it down.
In hip hop, there's never just someone at a door. It's a persona demanding to be seen. That's the energy I chased with this piece. I didn't start with a photo shoot or clean portraits. I went to the Knock Knock video and pulled some raw and imperfect frames. Because that's where the real attitude lives. Hip hop has always built characters out of these moments. The smirk, the posture, and the confidence. So every element here is stitched from the dollar signs world. The dollar cards, ambition. The megaphone, authority. The repetition, ego amplified. And the final grain, the reality behind the polish. So when you hear knock knock, it's not Krishna asking to enter, it's the persona kicking through the frame.
What I obviously love about this is the uniqueness of it, the use of bright colors, and that will always capture attention, mainly because it's so different from what everyone else is doing. And therefore, it's a big recommend. In general, as a rule of thumb, if you try and do the opposite of what most people are doing, you're often giving yourself a one-up to try and stand out in an often saturated industry.
In hip hop, there's never.
In regards to how he is on screen is pretty much always the same effect, and that is just him rotoscoped out. In case you don't know what rotoscoped means, it means that you take an object and you remove them from any background. So in essence, you're just cutting the background out. You can do this a variety of ways. After Effects is one of them, but on this show, we try to avoid After Effects at all costs. And therefore, a different way is Runway, and Premiere, if you've got the update, actually now has the object mask tool in there. I know that the other editing tools have, or especially DaVinci, I believe, has had this for a while already. Having recently tested the Premiere one, from my experience, it is decent, but not flawless yet. And so if you can afford the $11, I would recommend Runway still, but probably not for another year. Yeah, that is rotoscoping.
Never just someone at a door. It's a persona demanding to be seen. That's the energy I chased with this piece.
Which obviously means every time you see my man on screen, like here or here, this is always the same effect, right? It's just him rotoscoped, and then he's designed new backgrounds accordingly. Now, how would I go about creating, for example, a frame like this? We have a blue background, that one's kind of obvious. Then in Canva, you might look for, it's like a stamp border. You would put a green box on top of that stamp border. You need to add your rotoscoped layer into the stamp, and you need to crop to the line here that you want. And also from the right, you'll need to crop my guy to be within the stamp. And then here, in order to create this 3D looking effect, is where you actually leave it out. So kind of clever. And also what is smart is that here it looks clean. I can assure you, if you would have like had him lean over here, it would have looked messy and you wouldn't have been able to sell it. And then finally, you'll need some sort of like emoji sunflower layers added on top. One here, obviously, one here, to kind of round it out. And then he still has a font behind it. I'm not really sure what it says. That's still something you have to then add as well.
It's a persona demanding to be seen. That's the energy I chased with this piece. I didn't start with a photo shoot or...
All of these shots are just carefully designed together using different layers. And in his case, because of the nature of the video, he's just gone for this cartoony-istic feel and being consistent with that throughout. So for example, this, you could easily recreate this in Canva and then just drag your boy onto rotoscoped and all onto the box here. And if you have a decent rotoscope tool, it will have added in the shadow automatically in order to do this. So you got a white background, then you've got the two red things here which resemble curtains, and then the kind of layer on top, so the lights here. You have to then design in Canva or After Effects and put those on a green screen. And when you then do this zoom in, you need to keyframe the automations to start from big and go down to small until in place. And that's how you could recreate something like this.
Shoot or clean portraits. I went to the Knock Knock video and pulled some raw.
Again, the star in the back here, you can find shapes like this all the time. And then all it is a keyframe on the rotation, turning. And then other than that, it's about finding good imagery. What also sells this one again is the red circle here underneath in order to bring back the 3D feeling.
I went to the Knock Knock video and pulled some raw and imperfect.
This layer was definitely sick. Very curious how he would have created this. I imagine this was probably done with After Effects. You could recreate this in Premiere. You would probably do that by just downloading each layer on a green screen and positioning them with basic 3D and positioning keyframes. It's going to be very time consuming though. But if the goal is to make this without needing to open After Effects, then that's what I do.
Frames, because that's where the real...
This one was also sick. I mean, this guy's use of colors is fantastic. Regarding colors, this is probably an interesting tip that helped me at least tremendously. If you want to understand what colors might work well together, if you go to Adobe Color they actually have a color wheel on there, which tells you, for example, if you put it to complementary, it will tell you what colors work well together. Now, for example, you might set it to a complementary color scheme. This is always what is at the opposite end of the color wheel. And so that's also the theory behind a lot of color grades. For example, why orange and teal always work well together, because they're natural complementary colors to one another. An alternative is pink and green. And so when you understand how these colors work together, it's really easy to choose colors that support each other, that are contrasts, if you will. But in addition, it gives you other types as well. It tells you what works well in a square if you want different looks and feels. Either way, it's a great tool. I recommend using it.
Lips. Hip-hop has always built characters up lips.
Finishing up on this frame, other than great use of fonts and coloring, it's also obviously duplicating the layer, cropping it out so that just the eyes are left, and making it bigger and placing it weird equally here with the mouth to ultimately just create a weird feeling. And sometimes that's all you want to do.
Hip-hop has always built characters out of these movements. The smirk, the posture, and the confidence. So every element here is stitched from it.
This one was wild and is a little bit harder to do.
Here stitched from.
But in essence, once you have the design of the sewing machine and the paper on it, you then need to position your rotoscoped self using basic 3D to be flat, and then you need to keyframe it so that it moves along with it. In After Effects, you'll have a tracking tool that makes it a little bit easier, but in Premiere, you don't have that. And so what I tend to do then is, for example, let's say if I were to recreate this, I might say, oh, my fold here in the jacket lines up with this one. So I'm trying to keep it as close to that as the card moves through.
Reality behind the polish. So when you hear knock knock, reality behind the polish.
My guy, how do you even come up with it? Also this shot here.
So when you hear knock knock, it's not Krishna asking to enter, it's the persona kicking through the frame. Krishna asking to enter, it's the person.
Crazy, man. This was so cool. Also this final one that I break down. In essence, you can make two versions, the head layer, and then you just create a crop on one of the two layers, or use an opacity mask, for example, and then you create another one on the bottom. In essence, what you've just done is you've created two layers, two separate layers from one another that you can now keyframe. The bottom one goes down and the top one goes up, and that's how you're going to symbolize this haha that he's trying to recreate. On the whole, sick.
It's the persona kicking through the frame.
We've made it to another one, and I haven't physically died. And with that being said, I want to thank you guys for watching so much. If you enjoyed this show, do leave a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And with that being said, otherwise, I'll see ya in the next one. Adios.